Sarah Martinez adjusted her blazer nervously as she settled into Seat 2A of Flight 447 to Los Angeles. The leather felt cool against her back, and she couldn't help but smile at the spacious legroom that stretched before her. After years of cramped economy flights for business trips, this first-class upgrade felt like stepping into another world. The flight attendant approached with a warm smile, offering her a glass of champagne before takeoff. "Thank you so much," Sarah said, accepting the crystal flute. She had worked incredibly hard to afford this upgrade, saving for months to treat herself to comfort on this particularly important journey. She was heading to LA for the biggest presentation of her career, a chance to pitch her innovative software solution to a major tech company that could change everything for her small startup. As other passengers filtered onto the plane, Sarah noticed the curious glances thrown her way. She was used to the stares by now. Her appearance often surprised people in professional settings. Despite her business attire and confident demeanor, the intricate tattoos that peeked from her collar and sleeves seemed to make some passengers uncomfortable. The artwork told the story of her life, each piece carefully chosen and deeply meaningful. The elderly woman in 2B kept shooting disapproving looks in her direction, whispering to her husband about the type of people they let in first class these days. Sarah pretended not to notice, focusing instead on her presentation notes. She had encountered this kind of judgment countless times before, and she had learned not to let it derail her focus. 20 minutes after boarding began, a flight attendant named Jennifer approached Sarah's row with an apologetic expression. "Excuse me, miss," she said quietly, leaning down to speak directly to Sarah. "I'm afraid there's been a mistake with your seating assignment. We're going to need to move you to a different section of the aircraft." Sarah looked up from her papers, confused. "I'm sorry, what kind of mistake? I have my boarding pass right here, and I specifically paid for the first-class upgrade." She pulled out her phone to show the confirmation email, her heart beginning to race. This couldn't be happening, not today of all days. Jennifer glanced around nervously, clearly uncomfortable with the situation. "I understand your confusion, ma'am, but we've received some complaints from other passengers, and we feel it would be best if you were moved to ensure everyone's comfort during the flight." The words hit Sarah like a physical blow. She felt her cheeks flush with a mixture of embarrassment and anger. "Complaints about what exactly?" she asked, though she already knew the answer. Her tattoos were visible despite her professional attire. Delicate script along her collarbone, an artistic design on her wrist, and the edge of a larger piece on her shoulder that peeked out from her blouse. "Well," Jennifer hesitated, looking even more uncomfortable, "some passengers have expressed concerns about your appearance. They feel it might not be appropriate for the first-class cabin." Sarah felt the eyes of nearby passengers on her, some watching with obvious curiosity, while others quickly looked away. The elderly woman in 2B was nodding approvingly at Jennifer's words, as if this confirmed her earlier judgment. Sarah's hands trembled slightly as she gripped her boarding pass. "My appearance?" Sarah's voice was steady despite the turmoil inside her. "I'm wearing business attire. I'm not disturbing anyone. I paid the same price as everyone else for this seat." She gestured around the cabin. "What exactly about my appearance violates your airline's policy?" Jennifer shifted uncomfortably from foot to foot. "Ma'am, while there's no specific written policy, we do reserve the right to move passengers when other customers express discomfort. We have a lovely seat available in premium economy that we'd be happy to upgrade you to at no additional charge." "Premium economy?" Sarah's voice rose slightly, drawing more attention from nearby passengers. "I specifically paid for first class. I have an important business meeting in Los Angeles, and I chose this seat because I need the space to work and rest properly before my presentation." She could see other flight attendants gathering near the galley, watching the situation unfold. Some passengers were openly staring now, and she heard muffled conversations about the situation in first class. The humiliation was overwhelming, but Sarah forced herself to remain composed. "I understand this is frustrating," Jennifer continued, "but we really do need you to cooperate with us on this. The captain has been informed of the situation, and we'd prefer to resolve this quickly so we can depart on schedule." Sarah felt trapped between anger and disbelief. She had faced discrimination before, but never so blatantly and publicly. Her tattoos weren't offensive. They were beautiful pieces of art that represented her heritage, her struggles, and her triumphs. The largest piece on her back hidden beneath her blazer, told the story of her family's immigration to America. The script on her collarbone was a quote from her late grandmother in Spanish. Each mark on her skin had meaning, yet here she was being judged solely on their appearance. "I need to understand something," Sarah said, her voice growing stronger with resolve. "Are you telling me that I'm being moved from a seat I legally purchased because other passengers don't like how I look? Because if that's what's happening here, we have a much bigger problem than seating arrangements." The cabin had grown noticeably quieter, with more passengers tuning in to the confrontation. Sarah could feel her professional reputation and personal dignity hanging in the balance. She thought about all the times she had been underestimated because of her tattoos, all the clients who had initially doubted her abilities until she proved them wrong with her work. Jennifer looked increasingly flustered, glancing toward the cockpit as if hoping for rescue. "Ma'am, I really need you to gather your belongings and move to the other seat. We have a schedule to maintain, and this is causing a delay for all our passengers." Sarah remained seated, her decision crystallizing. "I'm not moving. I paid for this seat. I'm not violating any actual policies, and I refuse to be discriminated against because of my appearance. If there's a problem here, it's not with me. It's with an airline that would rather accommodate prejudice than stand up for what's right." The standoff continued as tensions mounted throughout the first-class cabin, with Sarah refusing to budge and the flight crew growing increasingly agitated about the delay. The tension in the first-class cabin was thick enough to cut with a knife. Sarah remained firmly planted in her seat while Jennifer, the flight attendant, looked increasingly desperate. Other crew members had joined the conversation, whispering among themselves and casting worried glances toward the cockpit door. "Ma'am, please," said David, the head flight attendant who had just arrived on the scene. His tone was more authoritative than Jennifer's, but Sarah could detect the underlying uncertainty. "We really need to resolve this situation. The captain is considering calling security if necessary." Sarah felt her stomach drop at the mention of security, but she maintained her composure. "Security? For what exactly? Sitting in a seat I purchased while wearing business attire?" She gestured to her professional blazer and slacks. "I'd like to speak to your captain directly. If he has concerns about my presence in first class, I want to hear them from him personally." Around them, fellow passengers were becoming increasingly agitated by the delay. Some checked their watches impatiently, while others pulled out their phones to record the unfolding drama. Sarah noticed a businessman in seat 1A shaking his head disapprovingly, though she wasn't sure if his disapproval was directed at her or the airline's handling of the situation. "The captain is busy with pre-flight preparations," David replied curtly. "I'm authorized to handle passenger issues, and I'm telling you that you need to move to maintain the peace and comfort of all passengers." "Whose comfort exactly?" Sarah challenged, her voice carrying clearly through the cabin. "I haven't spoken to anyone except your crew. I haven't caused any disturbance. The only discomfort here seems to be caused by people's prejudiced assumptions about my appearance." An unexpected voice joined the conversation. "Excuse me," said Dr. Rebecca Chen from seat 3A, a distinguished-looking woman in her 50s. "I couldn't help but overhear. Are you seriously asking this woman to move because of her tattoos?" David turned to Dr. Chen with a practiced smile. "Ma'am, this doesn't concern you. We're simply trying to accommodate all our passengers' needs." "It absolutely concerns me," Dr. Chen replied firmly, standing up to face the flight attendant. "I'm a civil rights attorney, and what I'm witnessing here appears to be discrimination based on appearance. This young woman has done nothing wrong, and you're treating her like a criminal." Sarah felt a surge of gratitude toward this stranger who was willing to speak up. She had felt so alone moments before, but now someone else could see the injustice of the situation. The elderly woman in 2B, Mrs. Patterson, finally spoke up. "Well, I think there are standards to maintain in first class. Some of us pay good money not to sit next to people like that." She gestured vaguely toward Sarah's visible tattoos. "People like what?" Dr. Chen turned to face Mrs. Patterson directly. "Young professionals? Business travelers? Or are you specifically referring to people with tattoos which, last I checked, is not illegal, immoral, or against any airline policy?" The confrontation was escalating, and Sarah could see that other passengers were choosing sides. A young man in seat 4B nodded in support of Dr. Chen, while an older businessman seemed to align with Mrs. Patterson's viewpoint. The cabin was becoming a microcosm of larger societal tensions about appearance. Prejudice and social norms. Look, David said, raising his hands in an attempt to restore order. We're not trying to discriminate against anyone. We're simply trying to ensure that all our passengers have a pleasant flight experience. By bowing to the prejudices of some passengers while trampling on the rights of others, Dr. Chen's voice was sharp with legal precision. That's textbook discrimination, and it's illegal under federal anti-discrimination laws. Sarah found her voice again, strengthened by Dr. Chen's support. I want to be very clear about what's happening here. I am a software engineer traveling to Los Angeles for a business presentation. I paid full price for this first-class seat. I am properly dressed, I haven't disturbed anyone, and I haven't violated any written airline policies. The only issue here is that some passengers don't like my tattoos. She stood up slowly, allowing more of her tattoos to become visible. The intricate artwork was clearly professional and artistic, not crude or offensive in any way. The design on her arm was a beautiful representation of a phoenix rising from flames, symbolizing her journey from a difficult childhood to professional success. These tattoos tell my story, Sarah continued, her voice growing stronger with each word. This phoenix represents overcoming adversity. The script on my collarbone is a quote from my grandmother, who immigrated to this country with nothing but hope. These aren't gang symbols or offensive images, they're art, they're personal history, and they're part of who I am. More passengers were now openly listening to her words. She noticed that some of the initial disapproval in their faces had shifted to curiosity, and a few even looked ashamed of their earlier judgments. Jennifer, who had started this confrontation, now looked deeply uncomfortable with how it had escalated. We didn't mean to offend anyone, she said quietly. We were just responding to complaints. Whose complaints? Dr. Chen demanded. I'd like to know exactly who complained and what they said. Because from where I'm sitting, this looks like profiling based on appearance. Before David could respond, the cockpit door opened and Captain Robert Hayes emerged. He was a tall, distinguished man in his late 50s with graying hair and a serious expression. His presence immediately commanded attention from everyone in the first-class cabin. What's the situation here? Captain Hayes asked, his eyes scanning the tense faces around him. We're already 15 minutes behind schedule, and I need to understand why we haven't pushed back from the gate. David quickly began explaining the situation, but Captain Hayes held up a hand to stop him. I'll hear from the passenger first, he said, turning to look directly at Sarah. Sarah felt her heart racing as she prepared to explain her side of the story to the captain. This was her moment to make her case, and she knew that whatever happened next could determine not just whether she kept her seat, but how this airline and its crew would handle similar situations in the future. Captain Hayes stood in the aisle, his commanding presence immediately changing the atmosphere in the first-class cabin. His weathered face showed the experience of someone who had dealt with countless challenging situations during his 25 years of flying. Sarah took a deep breath, knowing this was her crucial moment to present her case. Captain, Sarah began, her voice steady despite her racing heart. I purchased seat 2A and paid the full first-class fare. I boarded the aircraft without incident, took my assigned seat, and was preparing to work on an important business presentation. Your flight attendants then approached me and demanded that I move to a different section because other passengers complained about my appearance, specifically my tattoos. Captain Hayes listened intently, his expression unreadable. He glanced around the cabin, taking in the faces of the other passengers, some of whom looked uncomfortable with the scrutiny. His eyes returned to Sarah, taking note of her professional attire and the visible artwork on her skin. I see, the captain said thoughtfully. And these tattoos, are they offensive in nature? Profanity, violent imagery, anything that might genuinely disturb other passengers? Sarah rolled up her sleeve slightly to show the phoenix design on her forearm more clearly. This is a phoenix representing my journey from poverty to building my own technology company. The script you can see on my collarbone is a quote from my late grandmother in Spanish that translates to, "Strength through struggle." Nothing offensive, Captain. Just personal art that tells my story. Dr. Chen stepped forward slightly. Captain, I'm Dr. Rebecca Chen, a civil rights attorney. I've been observing this situation, and what's happening here appears to be clear discrimination based on appearance. This woman has violated no policies, caused no disturbances, and paid the same fare as everyone else. Captain Hayes nodded slowly, then turned to David, his head flight attendant. What exactly were the complaints about? Be specific, David shifted uncomfortably. Well, sir, Mrs. Patterson in 2B approached Jennifer and said she was uncomfortable sitting near someone with so many tattoos in first class. She felt it wasn't appropriate for this section of the aircraft. I see. Captain Hayes turned to Mrs. Patterson, who suddenly seemed much less confident than she had moments earlier. Ma'am, can you explain to me how this passenger's tattoos are affecting your flight experience? Has she spoken to you inappropriately? Played loud music? Invaded your space in any way? Mrs. Patterson's face flushed red. Well, no, but it's just, people of that sort don't belong in first class. There are standards to maintain. People of what sort? Captain Hayes asked, his tone remaining calm but with an edge that suggested he was not pleased with the direction of her comments. People with all those markings, it's unprofessional, unseemly. Mrs. Patterson's voice was becoming smaller as she realized how her words sounded when spoken aloud. Captain Hayes was quiet for a long moment. Studying the situation, Sarah watched his face carefully, trying to read his thoughts. She had encountered many people in positions of authority who had initially judged her based on her appearance, only to change their minds once they got to know her professionally. But she had also met plenty who never looked past the surface. Ma'am, the captain finally addressed Sarah. May I ask what kind of work you do? I'm a software engineer and entrepreneur, Sarah replied. I'm traveling to Los Angeles to present my company's new cybersecurity platform to a major tech firm. It's the biggest opportunity my startup has ever had, and you chose to fly first class because I need to arrive rested and prepared. I've been working 18-hour days for months preparing for this presentation. I saved for this upgrade because I knew how important it would be for me to have space to work and rest during the flight. Captain Hayes nodded, then turned to address the entire first-class cabin. Ladies and gentlemen, I've been flying for 25 years, and I've seen passengers of every background, appearance, and walk of life. What makes a good passenger is not how they look, but how they behave. Courtesy, respect for others, and following safety instructions. Those are the only standards that matter in my aircraft. He paused, letting his words sink in before continuing. This passenger has done nothing but purchase a seat and take her place quietly. The only disturbance in this cabin has been caused by complaints based purely on her appearance. Sarah felt a glimmer of hope as the captain's words seemed to be going in her favor. Around the cabin, she could see some passengers looking ashamed of their earlier judgments, while others still seemed uncomfortable with the situation. However, Captain Hayes continued, and Sarah's heart sank, I need to ensure the safety and comfort of all passengers. Tensions are clearly running high, and I don't want this conflict to continue during our flight. Sarah braced herself for the worst, certain that despite his seemingly supportive words, the captain was about to ask her to move. It wouldn't be the first time someone had talked about fairness and equality, while ultimately choosing the path of least resistance. But then Captain Hayes did something unexpected. He looked directly at Mrs. Patterson and said, Ma'am, I'm going to need you to make a choice. Either you can travel peacefully alongside all passengers regardless of their appearance, or I can arrange for you to take a later flight. But I will not have discrimination on my aircraft. The cabin fell completely silent. Mrs. Patterson's mouth opened and closed several times as she processed what the captain had just said. Her husband tugged at her sleeve, whispering urgently in her ear. You can't be serious, Mrs. Patterson finally managed to say. You're taking her side? I'm not taking anyone's side, Captain Hayes replied firmly. I'm upholding the law and basic human decency. This passenger has violated no rules and caused no genuine problems. Your complaint is based solely on prejudice, and I won't accommodate that. Dr. Chen smiled approvingly, and Sarah felt tears of relief beginning to form in her eyes. She had prepared herself for defeat, for another humiliating experience of being judged and found wanting based on her appearance. Instead, this veteran pilot was standing up for what was right. But the confrontation wasn't over yet. Mrs. Patterson was clearly not ready to back down, and the tension in the cabin remained high as other passengers watched to see how this unprecedented situation would resolve. Mrs. Patterson's face had turned a deep shade of red, and she looked around the cabin as if seeking support from other passengers. Her husband, Harold, was clearly embarrassed by his wife's behavior and kept trying to pull her back into her seat. Martha, please, Harold whispered urgently. Let's just drop this and have a peaceful flight. But Martha Patterson was not ready to back down. This is ridiculous, she declared, standing up to face Captain Hayes directly. I've been flying first class for 30 years and I've never been treated with such disrespect. You're going to let that person stay here while threatening to remove a paying customer like me? Captain Hayes remained calm, his voice steady and professional. Ma'am, you are absolutely a valued customer, and you're welcome to stay for this flight under one condition, that you treat all passengers with the same respect you expect to receive. Sarah watched the exchange with growing amazement. Never in her life had she encountered someone in authority who was willing to take such a strong stand against discrimination. She thought about all the time she had been passed over for promotions, excluded from professional gatherings, or treated as less capable because of her tattoos. Here was a man who was willing to risk a customer complaint to do what was right. I want to speak to your supervisor, Mrs. Patterson demanded. This is unacceptable customer service. I am the captain of this aircraft, Hayes replied. There is no higher authority here, and my decision is final. You can either remain on this flight and behave appropriately toward all passengers, or you can disembark and catch the next available flight. Dr. Chen leaned forward from her seat. Captain, I want you to know that as a witness to this situation, you're handling it exactly right. Federal law prohibits discrimination based on appearance, and you're protecting this airline from potential legal liability. Sarah found her voice again, addressing Mrs. Patterson directly. Ma'am, I'm sorry if my appearance makes you uncomfortable, but I'm just trying to travel to an important business meeting. The same as you. I'm not trying to cause problems for anyone. Don't apologize to her, said Marcus Johnson, a young black man in seat 4A who had been quietly observing the entire confrontation. You have nothing to apologize for. This is exactly the kind of prejudice people like us face every day, just because we don't look the way some people think we should. Marcus stood up, revealing his own professional attire and a small tattoo visible on his wrist. I'm a pediatric surgeon flying to LA for a medical conference. Should I be removed from first class too because I have ink on my skin? Captain Hayes looked around the cabin, taking in the faces of all the passengers. Let me be crystal clear about something. This airline does not discriminate based on tattoos, race, religion, or any other personal characteristic as long as passengers follow our safety rules and treat others with respect. He turned back to Mrs. Patterson. I need your decision now, ma'am. We're already significantly delayed, and I have a schedule to maintain. Harold Patterson finally stood up, taking his wife's arm firmly. Martha, we're staying, and you're going to sit down and be quiet. I'm embarrassed enough by your behavior for one day. Martha looked shocked by her husband's rebuke, but she allowed him to guide her back to her seat, muttering under her breath about the world going to hell and standards being lost. Captain Hayes addressed the entire cabin one final time. Ladies and gentlemen, we're going to complete our preparations for departure now. I expect everyone to treat their fellow passengers with courtesy and respect for the duration of this flight. Any further incidents of harassment or discrimination will result in federal charges upon landing. As the captain headed back toward the cockpit, Sarah felt overwhelmed with gratitude and emotion. She had been prepared for the worst, ready to be humiliated and forced to move, possibly even removed from the flight entirely. Instead, she had encountered someone willing to stand up for what was right, regardless of the potential consequences. Dr. Chen reached across the aisle to pat Sarah's hand. You handled that beautifully, young lady. Never let anyone make you feel ashamed of who you are. Marcus Johnson turned around from his seat. Sister, you just witnessed something special. That captain has some serious integrity. Most people in his position would have taken the easy road and moved you to avoid conflict. Sarah nodded, still processing what had just happened. I can't believe he stood up for me like that. I've faced discrimination before, but I've never had someone in authority take such a strong stand. That's because most people choose convenience over courage, Dr. Chen observed. But every now and then, you meet someone who understands that doing the right thing is more important than avoiding conflict. Jennifer, the flight attendant who had initially approached Sarah, came by with a genuinely apologetic expression. Ma'am, I want to sincerely apologize for how this situation started. I should have questioned the complaint more thoroughly, instead of just assuming we needed to accommodate it. Would you like anything to make your flight more comfortable? Sarah appreciated the apology, recognizing that Jennifer had likely been following what she thought were proper procedures. Thank you, I appreciate that. Maybe just some water when you have a chance. As the cabin crew began their final preparations for departure, Sarah settled back into her seat with a profound sense of validation. She pulled out her laptop to review her presentation materials but found it hard to concentrate. The confrontation had drained her emotionally, but it had also energized her in an unexpected way. She thought about how many times she had compromised herself to fit into other people's comfort zones, covering her tattoos for job interviews or client meetings, trying to make herself smaller and less visible to avoid conflict. Today, she had stood her ground, and not only had she been supported, but she had also witnessed others standing up for what was right. The plane finally began to push back from the gate, and Sarah looked out the window at the ground crew below. She was still heading to the most important presentation of her career, but now she felt different about it. She felt stronger, more confident in her own worth and identity. As Flight 447 reached cruising altitude, the tension in the first-class cabin had settled into an uncomfortable quiet. Sarah tried to focus on her presentation materials, but she kept replaying the confrontation in her mind. Every few minutes she caught other passengers stealing glances at her, though she couldn't tell if they were looks of curiosity, support, or lingering disapproval. About an hour into the flight, Captain Hayes emerged from the cockpit during a routine check. As he walked through the cabin, he paused beside Sarah's seat. "How are you doing, miss?" he asked quietly, his tone genuinely concerned. "Much better, thank you," Sarah replied. "I really can't express how much it meant to have you support me back there. Most people in your position would have taken the easier path." Captain Hayes studied her face for a moment, and Sarah noticed something shift in his expression. His eyes focused on the small tattoo visible just above her collarbone, the elegant script in Spanish that she had mentioned earlier. "May I ask you something personal?" he said, his voice becoming softer. Sarah nodded, wondering what had caught his attention. "That script on your collarbone. You said it was from your grandmother. What exactly does it say?" "Fuerza a través de la lucha," Sarah replied. "It means strength through struggle. My grandmother used to tell me that every hardship makes us stronger if we choose to learn from it instead of being defeated by it." Captain Hayes was quiet for a long moment, and Sarah saw something profound happen in his expression. His professional composure cracked slightly, revealing a deep emotion underneath. "What was your grandmother's name?" he asked quietly. Sarah was surprised by the personal question but answered, "Elena Vasquez. She immigrated here from Mexico in 1952 with nothing but hope and determination. She worked in factories her whole life to give her family a better future." Captain Hayes's face went pale, and he gripped the back of the seat in front of Sarah. "Elena Vasquez from Puebla? About 5 feet tall, with graying hair she always wore in a bun, and the most determined spirit you've ever seen?" Sarah's heart stopped. How could this stranger know such specific details about her grandmother? "Yes," she whispered. "How could you possibly know that?" "Because," Captain Hayes said, his voice thick with emotion, "your grandmother saved my life 43 years ago." The revelation hit Sarah like a physical blow. She stared at the captain, searching his face for answers. Around them, other passengers were beginning to notice the intense conversation, but Sarah was completely focused on Captain Hayes. "I don't understand," she said. "How, when?" Captain Hayes looked around the cabin, realizing their conversation was drawing attention. "Would you mind if I told you this story? It's something I've never forgotten, but I never thought I'd have the chance to share it with someone who would understand its significance." Sarah nodded, her presentation materials completely forgotten now. "I was 22 years old in 1982. Fresh out of flight school and full of myself," Captain Hayes began. "I was driving through East LA late one night, probably going too fast and definitely not paying enough attention. I lost control of my car on a wet road and crashed into a telephone pole." He paused, the memory clearly still vivid after all these years. "I was trapped in the car, bleeding badly, and it was late enough that there wasn't much traffic. I thought I was going to die there. But then this small woman appeared at my window. She couldn't speak much English, but she could see I was hurt. She stayed with me, talking to me in Spanish and broken English, keeping me conscious while she flagged down help." Sarah felt tears forming in her eyes as she began to understand the connection. She rode with me in the ambulance even though she didn't know me. She held my hand and kept saying something in Spanish over and over. Later I learned she was saying "Fuerza a través de la lucha," strength through struggle. She was telling me to fight, to stay strong. Captain Hayes wiped his eyes, not caring who saw his emotion. The doctor said I had lost a lot of blood and might not have made it if she hadn't found me when she did and kept me awake until help arrived. But here's the thing that I'll never forget. When I tried to thank her at the hospital, she just smiled and said in her broken English, "We help each other. That's what we do." Sarah was crying now, understanding flooding through her. She never told us about this. She never mentioned saving someone. That was exactly like her, Captain Hayes continued. I tried to find her afterward to properly thank her, but all I knew was her first name and that she worked at a textile factory somewhere in the area. This was before the internet, and I was young and didn't know how to track someone down. I always regretted not being able to tell her how much she meant to me. The captain looked directly into Sarah's eyes. When I saw that tattoo and heard what it meant to you, I wondered if there might be a connection. And when you said her name, I knew it had to be the same Elena Vasquez. She gave me more than just my life that night. She taught me something about human decency that I've never forgotten. "Oh my God," Sarah whispered. "She died 5 years ago, but she would have been so happy to know that you remembered her, that her actions made such a difference." "She made all the difference," Captain Hayes said firmly. "Not just in saving my life, but in teaching me what it means to help someone regardless of who they are or what they look like. That lesson guided me through my entire career." Dr. Chen, who had been listening from across the aisle, spoke softly. "This is why you stood up for Sarah earlier, isn't it? Because you learned from her grandmother that we judge people by their actions, not their appearance." Captain Hayes nodded. "Elena Vasquez didn't know anything about me when she stopped to help. She didn't care what I looked like or where I came from. She saw someone who needed help and she helped. When I saw what was happening to her granddaughter today, being judged and mistreated because of how she looks instead of who she is, I knew exactly what Elena would have wanted me to do." Sarah was overwhelmed by the incredible connection, the way her grandmother's kindness had rippled forward through the years to protect her in this moment. It felt like Elena was somehow still watching over her, still teaching lessons about strength and dignity. The revelation about the connection between Captain Hayes and Sarah's grandmother had transformed the atmosphere in the first-class cabin completely. Other passengers were wiping away tears as they overheard the incredible story, and even Mrs. Patterson looked deeply moved by what she had witnessed. Captain Hayes pulled out his wallet and showed Sarah an old, worn photograph. "I've carried this for 43 years, he said. "A nurse at the hospital took it of me and Elena before she left. She insisted she didn't need thanks, but she let me take this picture." Sarah stared at the faded photograph showing a much younger Captain Hayes in a hospital bed, with her beloved grandmother sitting beside him, her familiar gentle smile radiating warmth even in the old picture. Seeing her grandmother's face brought back a flood of memories. Elena's strong hands braiding Sarah's hair, her voice telling stories of the old country, her unwavering belief in the importance of education and hard work. "She talked about you all the time," Sarah said through her tears. "Not specifically about that night, but she always told us stories about people she'd helped over the years. She'd say, 'Mia, we are all connected. The kindness you show to a stranger today might save your own granddaughter tomorrow.' I never understood what she meant until now." Captain Hayes sat down in the empty seat across from Sarah, his professional duties temporarily forgotten. "Your grandmother was a remarkable woman. She didn't just save my life that night. She changed how I see the world. Every time I've encountered someone being judged unfairly, I hear her voice telling me that we help each other, regardless of differences." Marcus Johnson turned around from his seat, his own eyes moist with emotion. "Captain, what you did today, standing up against discrimination, that's exactly what this world needs more of. You honored that woman's memory in the most beautiful way possible." Dr. Chen nodded in agreement. "This is what Elena's granddaughter was trying to tell us earlier. Those tattoos aren't just decorations. They're her family's story, her grandmother's legacy. Each mark represents the strength and struggle that Elena embodied." Sarah touched the script on her collarbone gently. "After she died, I got this tattoo as a way to keep her words with me always. She used to say it whenever I faced challenges, when kids at school made fun of my secondhand clothes, when teachers doubted my abilities, when I was working 3 jobs to get through college. She sounds like she raised you right," Captain Hayes said with a smile. "I can see her strength in how you handled yourself today. You didn't back down when you knew you were right, but you also didn't let anger make you cruel. That's pure Elena Vasquez. Around the cabin, other passengers were listening intently to the conversation. The businessman in 1A, who had initially seemed disapproving, spoke up quietly. "I owe you an apology, miss. I made assumptions about you based on your appearance, and I was completely wrong. Your grandmother sounds like she was an extraordinary person." Even Harold Patterson turned to his wife and whispered something that made Martha look ashamed of her earlier behavior. She eventually mustered the courage to speak, though her voice was barely audible. I was wrong earlier. I let my prejudices cloud my judgment. Your grandmother would be proud of how you handled yourself today." Sarah felt the healing power of these acknowledgments, but more than that, she felt the presence of her grandmother's spirit in this moment. Elena had always believed that people were fundamentally good, that misunderstandings could be resolved through patience and kindness. "She would have loved all of you," Sarah said to the cabin. Even in moments of conflict, she believed people could change, could grow. She always said that anger and prejudice come from fear, and fear comes from not understanding each other. Captain Hayes pulled out a small notebook and wrote something down, then tore out the page and handed it to Sarah. "This is my personal contact information. I want you to know that your grandmother's kindness has rippled through my entire life. I became a pilot partly because she taught me that we all have the responsibility to help others reach their destinations safely." Sarah looked at the paper, overwhelmed by the gesture. "I can't believe this is happening. I woke up this morning worried about a business presentation, and now I feel like I've discovered a missing piece of my family's story." "Speaking of your presentation," Dr. Chen said, "what kind of company are you pitching to?" "It's a cybersecurity firm," Sarah explained. "My startup has developed a platform that helps small businesses protect themselves from cyber attacks. It's been my life's work for the past 3 years." Captain Hayes smiled. "Your grandmother would be so proud. She came to this country with nothing, worked in factories her whole life so her family could have better opportunities. And here you are running your own technology company, traveling first class to make deals that could change your life. The American dream in action," Marcus added, "built on the foundation of a grandmother's sacrifice and strength." As the flight continued toward Los Angeles, the conversation in first class became increasingly warm and connected. Other passengers shared their own stories about overcoming prejudice and finding unexpected connections with strangers. Mrs. Patterson even apologized more formally, admitting that she had been raised with certain biases that she was now working to overcome. Jennifer, the flight attendant, approached with tears in her eyes. "Ma'am, I want to apologize again for how this situation started. But I also want to thank you for teaching all of us something important today about not judging people by their appearance." As they began their descent into LAX, Captain Hayes returned to the cockpit, but not before stopping by Sarah's seat one more time. "I want you to know that meeting you today has been one of the most meaningful experiences of my career. You've given me the chance to finally say thank you to the woman who saved my life, even if I have to do it through her granddaughter." Sarah felt a profound sense of completion, as if a circle that had been open for 43 years was finally closing. Her grandmother's act of kindness had created a ripple effect that had ultimately protected Sarah in her own moment of need. When the plane touched down in Los Angeles, Sarah felt different than she had when she boarded in New York. She felt more confident, more connected to her heritage, and more certain that her grandmother's lessons about strength through struggle would guide her through whatever challenges lay ahead. As passengers began to disembark, several stopped to wish her luck with her presentation. Dr. Chen handed her a business card, saying she'd love to hear about Sarah's company, and might even be interested in investing. Marcus exchanged contact information, mentioning that his hospital system was always looking for good cybersecurity solutions. But it was Captain Hayes who provided the most meaningful farewell. As Sarah gathered her belongings, he appeared beside her seat one final time. "Your grandmother taught me that we're all connected by invisible threads of kindness," he said. "Today I got to see how those threads weave through time to create moments of grace. Thank you for letting me finally repay a debt I've carried for 4 decades. Sarah hugged him, feeling her grandmother's presence in that embrace. She would have said there was no debt to repay. Kindness isn't a loan. It's a gift that we pass forward. As Sarah walked off the plane and into the bustling terminal, she touched the tattoo on her collarbone and whispered, "Gracias, abuela. Your strength carried me through today, just like it always has." She had arrived in Los Angeles not just ready for her presentation, but transformed by the knowledge that her grandmother's legacy of kindness was still creating miracles in the world, connecting strangers across time and teaching lessons about the true measure of a person's worth.